so that you kind of know where you are. It's the afternoon here now in Stockholm, and I'm just going to turn the camera around so that you can see people waving to you.
Oh,
Wave
hi
at me.
everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Cool.
Uh, so,
Great.
so that is what we have, and I have pulled up your web page here, just
Uh,
in order to introduce you. Hang on, I'm gonna start the Zoom recording here. Here we go. So it's lovely to have you here, Ken. So Ken Stanley is visiting the IBU course that runs in Stockholm, which is focused on AI for experience design. Ken, when we had our absolute first workshop of the course, we were looking at some things that Ken built. Back in 2010, there was Galactic Arms Race. Ken has done many other games as well, like a Pick Breeder, Petals, and many, many more. And Ken, you have been at OpenAI recently, and now you've founded your own new company. And we are here now to welcome you to talk about art and AI and art in that intersection. Here we go. I'm going to spotlight you.
all right, let's see if this works. We're just screen sharing.
Yeah, it does
Okay.
work. We can see it.
You see this screen and all right, let's see here. Yeah, you can see the mouse, I guess,
Yep, we
on
see
the
the
screen.
mouse. Everything
And
is
you still see
working.
me. Okay. All right, great. All right, I'm gonna do this. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for having me here. And I'm going to talk about a topic that I think is fun. And it's a little, maybe a little bit off from the main themes of like actually games or in particular, but um, I think it's still going to be fun and interesting to you, which is about art in the sciences of the artificial. So let's see. So what I'm going to do is kind of it's going to be a critique of the field of AI in a sense. But it probably be thought provoking in a lot of different ways than just that. And so I'd be happy to hear what people think after seeing this little critique. And it definitely touches on the power of artistic thinking. So, because of course we know there's a lot of new AI in art these days. But this is actually about more like art in AI. So you'll see what I mean. So like if you're an AI novice, you're getting into the field of artificial intelligence. Um, you will you should probably follow this tip. This is a tip for new researchers in the field of AI, which is to make sure that your claims are scientific. So like here, got this researcher and she thinks she did something really good. So she said, I think my AI is truly intelligent. Check out what it produced. Look, it's a pretty picture. So this computer just did this and she's proud of it. But here, this guy here, he's not going to stand for any, any kind of made up stuff here. And he's a really hardcore scientist. So he said, that's not scientific. You need to evaluate it on this human assessment V47.6 benchmark before you can make a claim like that. You see, this is fairly a typical thing that can happen. So you can't just like point to a picture like this and say, oh, wow, this is really intelligent. You got to have some rigorous benchmark results. But wait a second. The thing that I want to ask you before we accept this critique is AI a science? Because, artificial is an unusual word for a science, isn't it? It's like if you think about like names of sciences like physics, biology, chemistry, they don't have the word artificial in them. Artificial generally implies like a reproduction of nature in artifice. It means about artifice. So you've got a few fields that have that kind of wording like artificial intelligence, artificial life, but it's not the typical thing that you call science. So if we're talking about the reproduction of nature in artifice, because basically like intelligence is a natural phenomenon, right? Like it's something that we see in nature, we're trying to reproduce it artificially. Like what do you call something that's a reproduction of nature in artifice? Well, is that called science? I mean, generally that's not called science, it's called art. So it's kind of strange that this is actually considered to be a science. I mean, or at least this is something we could question. Generally speaking, when reproduction of nature and artifice is called art. It's got the art in it. So now when people do art, often the aim is to resonate with something in nature. So this might be slightly different. Like, you see these things like, you see like this resonates with something about capturing an expression that we know, like from actual life experiences, or something about the human body has been captured here. It seems to resonate, or something about, this still life is a meal in front of you. And it looks like real utensils and stuff like that. These seem to resonate with something that we're familiar with in nature. So they impress us. But the interesting thing, though, is that the word resonate is not the same as accuracy, right? Like this is a quote from a book, which is about art. This is like, I think art historians refer often to this book. And I don't claim to be an art historian, but I still stole this from the book. And what Gombrich said was that what a painter inquires into is not the nature of the physical world, that would be science, but the nature of our reactions to it. So that's where the resonating comes from. It's like resonating with your reaction to the physical world, which means it doesn't have to necessarily be accurate. So like, here's just a dictionary definition of the word resonate. It says to have a particular meaning or importance to someone, to affect or appeal to someone in a personal or emotional way, to relate harmoniously or strike a chord. It's just like resonating with someone. I mean, this is very important for artistic appeal, probably for the appeal also of the experience of any kind of media or game or anything like that. It should resonate with you and strike a chord. And that's why these things count as art and do resonate, but they're very inaccurate. It's often like, look at like a caricature. This is a very old caricature of Abraham Lincoln from 1864. It's obviously making a joke about his height and thinness, and he doesn't actually look like this, but it resonates with our understanding of the character. This former US President Lyndon Johnson doesn't have a nose that looks this long, but it's a caricature. So no one's going to object that it's not accurate. It resonates with our recognition of that character. And then something like this, which is Van Gogh's Starry Night, obviously does not look like any Starry Night you've ever seen. It's unless you've been on some serious drugs, and probably then still doesn't look like this. But yet it resonates in some way with what we recognize as Starry Night. And so all these things don't have to be accurate in any sense in order to be really actually compelling art. So maybe like right. Well, maybe it's because of the inaccuracy that we learn something about the Starry Night. So it's like, if it really did look exactly like a Starry Night, like a photograph, it wouldn't communicate the same kind of information as it does by not looking like a Starry Night. But what it's actually informing is actually your understanding of what you perceive when you see a Starry Night. Like it could only have given you or expanded your thinking about the connotations of a Starry Night by not actually looking like an accurate depiction of a Starry Night. So it's giving us new insight into something by distorting it intentionally. And that allows us to understand it better, allows us to understand ourselves better, which is why it's appealing as art. Now we got to bring this guy back into things here, because he really likes things to be accurate because he's a scientist. And he says, wait a second, you have to compare it to a real Starry Night to evaluate its accuracy, right? Like, should we do this then? So let's do like a good benchmark comparison, which is what a scientist should do. We'll take Van Gogh's Starry Night and we'll compare it to a photograph of a Starry Night. And so if we tried to submit this to the International Conference on Starry Nights, it would not be accepted because it's obviously not accurate at all, right? So this guy is upset. And so this is of course ridiculous. You not do this. It has nothing to do with the value of this image, how it compares to this. It's just something to keep in mind. So this would be a ridiculous thing to do from an artistic perspective. But the thing to consider here, which I think is an interesting insight, is that an algorithm in artificial intelligence, algorithm, is also a kind of painting when it's depicting a natural phenomenon. This is something to process for a second here. So you think about intelligence as a natural phenomenon, just like Starry Nights are natural phenomena. Like you see Starry Nights, they occur in nature. The painting is a depiction of that. An algorithm that's depicting something natural, like intelligence or like life, is just like a painting. It's capturing that in an artificial setting, like the canvas, except that the lens, when you're talking about an algorithm, is a process rather than an image. And the paint is code rather than color, right? So like what defines intelligence is really process. Like there's nothing to look at from an imagery perspective. It's a process that happens, and we can recognize that process, but it's depicted in the case of an algorithm through code. It's a depiction because it's not the real thing, right? I mean, it's not actually human intelligence. It's not actually my brain, at least. It's not actually a brain, but it's a depiction of what the brain does, and it's painted through code. But if you think about it like that, then why would we not evaluate it as such? In other words, can an algorithm be a Starry Night of intelligence? Because if it was, then it wouldn't be the key instrumental issue would not be whether it's an accurate depiction of it, but rather the degree to which it gives us insight into something about ourselves. Now, it's true that the only person who can appreciate the canvas here is someone who can understand code. That doesn't change anything about the fact that ultimately it's an interpretation of reality. And in that sense, it inherits, I think, all of these aspects of what we understand about what makes something art. So just to be clear, this is not an argument about computer-generated art. Like we could look at a picture, like this one from Pick Breeder of the butterfly, and we could ask, is it art? You may actually have had this kind of discussion maybe in this class, but that's not the point I'm making. I'm not saying that we're going to ask about whether computer-generated imagery deserves to be called art. I'm claiming that the algorithms are the art. The algorithms themselves are art because they are depictions of nature, which are actually depicted through code. So now the next question you might have is, why does this matter? Like, seems like a rather obtuse argument, and it's not clear why we're even arguing about this. Like, why do I need to claim that AI is art? Well, because the problem here is that the field of artificial intelligence is engaged, in effect, in a search process. The search is a search to the space of algorithms. Like, we're interested in things that capture something about intelligence. So, and like any search process, there's a chain of stepping stones that will be covered as we move from algorithm to algorithm to algorithm to see where we might be going, with the hope, I think within the field, the hope is that we'll arrive at something that's like a good approximation of intelligence, or whatever you want to believe is intelligence. And so if AI is only a science, that means we're only allowed to traverse the stepping stones of science in public discourse. You see, we cannot look at things like Starry Nights because they would fail the accuracy test, fail the benchmark tests, and then they would not be allowed to be admissible into the public discourse. So we have just eliminated a lot of stepping stones. But the problem is, because this is a field about artifice, a Starry Night can reveal a different path. And that's essential to a field that's about artifice. So in other words, by a different path, I'm saying here are stepping stones. Here's an idea, leads to another scientific idea. But the problem is that out here is something interesting way out at this frontier. It's too far to make a single hop. This scientific insight can't get to this one through a single hop, but there's an artistic insight in the middle. Totally plausible, because this is a field based on artifice. So we create things that are reminiscent of things that we see in nature, in this case, intelligence. It is perfectly plausible that one of the stepping stones along the way is art, or would be interpreted, in other words, as an artistic contribution, something like a Starry Night, that changes your interpretation, because obviously a change in my interpretation or understanding of intelligence can be valuable in my ability to then conceive of new types of scientific experiments in the field of artificial intelligence. Like, that makes total sense. I need to change my conception and expand my mind. But these things, these stepping stones that are artistic, have been eliminated from public discourse because they're artistic, because everybody would say they're not science. So what I'm saying is subjective resonance means how much does it resonate, just in terms of like art, subjectively, not an objective point. It's subjective because, you know, for some people, Starry Night doesn't resonate, right? Like, it might not be that exciting to you when you look at Starry Night. I can't force you to accept that Starry Night is an interesting painting, because it's ultimately subjective. There's no objective benchmark that we can apply. Most people agree it's interesting, but some will not. So subjective resonance is the issue, but that has to be part of the professional discourse in AI in order to make such stepping stones admissible, because ultimately algorithms are like paintings. They're stepping stones through a space that we're searching. Now, people have argued in the past about art within science. Like, this is like a very long-running argument, a philosophical argument through many centuries, actually. You know, like Einstein has said things like the greatest scientists are artists as well. There's like a famous book about the subject called The Art of Scientific Investigation by Beveridge from 1950, which also makes arguments similar to what Einstein said. But the thing is that I'm not making this argument again. It's not just a generic argument. Like, all that's saying is that it helps to have some artistic instincts if you're a scientist. Like, you can sort of say, that is an elegant argument that you're making. And elegance can help you to, like, sort of see a path that might be of interest scientifically. But I'm making a different argument. I'm not saying that artistic insight helps scientists, which I agree with. What I'm saying is that AI is intrinsically artistic, that it's not just metaphorical. I'm not just saying it's like an art, like you can be like an artist and like make progress. I'm saying that effectively, as a field predicated on artifice, it is art. It's not just metaphorical. You cannot make a progress in a field that's based on artifice if you do not actually treat it as art. And so, with that argument, which I think is probably qualifies as a radical argument, because, I mean, you know, in the field of artificial intelligence, everybody's very prideful that they're scientists, right? I mean, it's like offensive to suggest that they're just artists. We wouldn't want to be told you're not doing science, actually. So I think it's a radical argument to say that AI is actually a branch of art. And I do want to acknowledge it's also a branch of science. It's at the overlap, right? Like, so I wouldn't deny that it's a scientific field. Scientific experiments do apply in artificial intelligence, but it's also a branch of art, is my claim. And that tends to be radical because it violates that kind of conceit that artificial intelligence researchers have, that they're pure scientists. And so so what I wanted to do, though, to support that, as I come to the close, the close of the talk, is to just give some examples from my own research. I want to show you why it's helpful to think like an artist if you're doing artificial intelligence research. And so I want to show you a couple of examples. So let me show you these couple of examples from my own research, and this will kind of make this more concrete. I decided, actually, by the way, this whole thing comes from a paper I published. I think it was around 2016. It's in Leonardo Journal, which goes by the same name as this talk, Art and Sciences of the Artificial. So I basically just took this whole talk and ripped it off of that paper. So I tried to make this argument in print. And in that article, I thought it'd be easiest for me to be able to support my argument if I use examples from my own career, because I know what happened. And the problem is I'm not making a scientific argument, right? Like, I'm making a kind of a subjective argument. So it's hard to do that about anything else other than myself, because I know subjectively what I experienced. So this is no longer objective, but I still need to provide evidence, like to show you why this is true. So it made sense to then sort of take it from my own career. And of course, my career inspired me to write this. So I have those examples. And so what I want to tell you about first is like this little story about I was interested in making like in artificial DNA. Like I was interested in evolutionary computation, and I was interested in things that work like DNA. And so, like, I was looking at things that are called indirect encodings, which are like supposed to be things that work like what we see in DNA. And, DNA, like to me, there's an artistic aspect to its interpretation because it produces things like this picture. Like this picture is not a scientific depiction. In fact, many scientists would just point out it's totally inaccurate. This isn't exactly the progression, but it's artistic. It's an artistic interpretation of a certain kind of progression, which had really captivated and fascinated me for years, which is how can this happen? Like you can get from something like this basically like ape-like creature that's an ancestor up to a human in a relatively small progression. When I say relatively small, I mean, it's like 300,000 generations, something like that, which is tiny, tiny. If you think about the number of iterations like that happen in modern machine learning, which could be up to billions, 300,000 is a tiny drop in the bucket. But it gets you from this animal who basically has no culture, has no science, knows nothing, to the creation, the brain that created all of human civilization in 300,000 steps. Like this is a very interesting kind of progression. And I was looking at like how can you see things like that? And like at around the year 2003, 2004, people were coming out with these things called neat-based genetic art apps. This was of interest to me mainly because I had just invented neat a couple of years before that, which is this algorithm that involves increasingly complex neural networks. And people had converted it. This wasn't my idea, but they converted it into these like apps where you could evolve through genetic art. You could read pictures with them. But underneath the hood was a neat neural network that was getting more complex. So these are a couple examples from that era of these things. And I was playing with them. I was very fascinated because, like, to me, like you could actually see, I hadn't really thought of it before, but like I could see what this neural network is computing, like visually. And it gave me insight into what actually goes on inside of all these connections. It was to me, it was a very deep, insightful kind of thing to kind of search through these spaces visually, explicitly. So I was doing that. It works like this. If you're not familiar, you probably are, but if you're not familiar, like this is a genetic art tool. This is actually taken from PicBreeder, but you'd see a bunch of blobs and you could pick one. And then it would have children. So basically children are mutations of that. And underneath the hood now is the neat algorithm. So actually there's neural networks underneath the hood producing these images that are being mutated. But here, so this has nothing to do with modern like generative art like DALL-E or something like that, or Stable Diffusion. Like it's not that. This is like 20 years earlier, much different technology, way more simple, but very powerful nonetheless. And so these are the children. This one looks kind of interesting, so I could pick that. And it has more children. You can see children look like the parent, but maybe a little bit different. They're not exact, just like if you had children. So just breeding. And if you kept going on with that, you'd get to, well, actually, here's what I got to. Playing with one of these tools, this is before PicBreeder existed, I got this thing. This just happened to me. Like I had a sequence, and here's where, this subjective interpretation comes into play, because this isn't really a scientific result, but it was from an artistic point of view, it was absolutely mind-blowing to me, because I thought, and you can see the underlying neural networks got more complex. Like this was the first one, this is the last one in the progression after evolving them in this way. But I thought this was absolutely incredible. And because to me, what I thought was, it looks like this. Now, this is where it gets subjective, right? Because like there's no experiment that can be done to prove anything here. Like you can't say, well, this equals this from like, an objective perspective. But subjectively, it's just incredibly reminiscent. Like the Starry Night of a Starry Night. Like, I mean, like literally, it doesn't look like this. Like obviously, these are not these. But subjectively, I think it captures something in the spirit. Because, like, look what's happening here. Like, the really interesting thing I think about evolution in this picture here is that conventions are preserved throughout the run. So, like, symmetry here was discovered, like, early on, like the symmetric rocket ship. I thought of it as a spaceship. It's a spaceship. It's symmetric. Now, look, it's preserved all the way throughout, but it's complexified upon that convention. So, if a convention is established, then a new convention is established, like a tail. Look, this rounded off tail appears here. This is like amazing to me because it just happens all at once. And from then on, you have tails, right? But then the tail gets this cleft over here. that I thought was really remarkable. And then that's preserved throughout this, but elaborated. And so one of the most amazing things that happened in this to me, which is totally mind-blowing, is that these two tail fins appeared, just like you see on airplanes, right? Like you see these tail fins in step H. They just appeared both at the same time, like completely on their own. Like this system knows nothing about spaceships or airplanes or rocket ships or anything. This is just purely random mutation. But it has that look because, you know, it's similar to the idea that in the history of human evolution, it's not like one leg was discovered. So there are all these like one-legged people hopping around. And then later, fortunately, another leg just appeared. Like that doesn't happen that way. But a lot of the time, naive algorithms do actually work that way, like naive genetic algorithms, which is not realistic at all. But this actually works the way nature works, you know. So the tail fins got discovered and they got preserved and elaborated. Look how different the tail fins are here than here, but they're still the tail fins. And then this other like amazing innovation happened in my view, which was the invention of the cockpit here. This is like an exaptation though, because it's basically part of the tail fin, right? It kind of got like ripped off of the tail fin and turned into a cockpit, which is just like all these exaptation examples that exist in nature, where one thing is borrowed to become another thing later. So like to me, this progression is so natural, just captures so much, even though it's not natural at all. It's like the Starry Night. So this is my Starry Night for evolution. And I thought something amazing happened, something absolutely incredibly amazing. And I was telling people I was totally obsessed with this, like around this like 2003 or something like that. I said, this is going to change everything. This is just a spaceship thing that I evolved. I was like, this is so important. This is like a fundamental thing. People thought I was crazy. They're like, yeah, you did a good job. Like you got it to evolve a spaceship. It looks cool, but this is not like a revolution, right? Like this is just like a nice genetic art. But to me, because it was a Starry Night, it was like it totally changed my perception. And in fact, I would claim in hindsight, it was really revolutionary because it led to all these discoveries. Like this is why I realized that there's a different kind of artificial DNA, which eventually were called compositional pattern producing networks, which led to a whole field, which led to the hyperneed algorithm, which was this way of encoding huge networks, like with millions of connections in very small genetic encodings, which is actually very reminiscent again of what we see in DNA. In DNA, there's about 30,000 genes. About 30,000 genes in the human genome. This is encoding a brain with 100 trillion connections, not to mention the whole entire human body. So extremely compact encoding. There's always a question how, and this kind of thing was starting to be done with the hyperneed algorithm, which emerges from just looking at this. Pick breeder also emerges from this. So the point is, it's a stepping stone, like the pick breeder, or the ability to evolve these images in the need algorithm. And this just a sequence is a stepping stone. It's all kinds of discoveries. And this is why it's very important to be able to talk about the subjective resonance that occurred at that step. You know, the pick breeder users, they discovered all these things eventually. So incredible evolutionary discoveries, like to know this is artificial encoding. This all goes back to that original discovery. But then once again, something popped out, another subjective thing, which I thought this was absolutely incredible, which is that, look, like the things that lead to things we discovered in pick breeder don't look like them. Like if you go back far enough in the ancestry, like this egg with a hat leads to this pitcher, or this dish leads to this skull, or letter G leads to this Jupiter with its red spot. And like this was a discovery also. And to me, this had a moral inside of it, which is that you can only find things by not looking for them. It's like if I was looking for a pitcher, I wouldn't want to choose an egg with a hat. If I was looking for a skull, I wouldn't want a dish, right? Like none of these make any sense. But like these are actually the progressions that happen. So like the people that found these things weren't looking for them, which means you can only find things by not looking for them, which I thought was mind-blowing again and profound. So again, I can't be proven. Like if you look at this, you could be like, well, prove it to me. Prove this. But this is true. This is facts that this is the progression that it went through. But can I prove to you that you can only find things by not looking for them, just by looking at this? But I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm talking to you about effectively an artistic resonance here. But because I had that resonance with this strange looking sequence, that led to the novelty search algorithm, which led to an entire new field of quality diversity algorithms. You can go to this website here, you'll find hundreds of papers written about quality diversity algorithms. It goes back to this recognition from these images, and also this whole book that I wrote with Joel Lehman, which at this point a lot of people know. it becomes of that insight. So like all these things come from that are of scientific value, but here there's something subjective there that's a stepping stone. And so subjective resonance mattered. These things could not have been pursued without that, but these are like inadmissible in the field. We don't have a mechanism to talk about subjective resonance. Usually it would be rejected if you're trying to submit it to a conference or a journal. And I finally just want to point out the algorithms themselves are artistic artifacts. So it's not just a point. I mean, I could just stop there and say the point is look at all these insights from looking at stuff that's effectively aesthetic. Look at all these and then appreciate the fact that there are subjective insights in here. But that's not, I want to go farther than that. I want to say that the algorithms themselves are artistic statements. This is a way that algorithms are almost never spoken about. And so to have the conceit to be able to do that, I have to use my own history, because I understand what I was thinking about, And the thing is, I wasn't always thinking scientifically. That's the point I want to make. But I could never say this in a scientific paper because they would just dismiss it and say, who cares? Like, that's ridiculous. It has nothing to do with science. But it's very important because it's why these things were so compelling to me. So let me just try to describe my own algorithms in artistic terms, because I think actually I was acting as an artist when I made these, more than a scientist, because I know this is what was motivating me ultimately. Like, these are the real reasons that you never hear, right? You'll never hear. It's not like I'm the only one. It's just that you'll never hear these things because we're not allowed to talk about them because it's supposed to be a science. But I feel like I was more of an artist when I was thinking about these things, because this is really what was motivating me. So like the NEAT algorithm, which is about involving increasingly complex neural networks, was really a meditation on the elegance of increasing complexity in nature. Like, I didn't think the NEAT algorithm was an accurate depiction of nature itself. Like, I wouldn't claim NEAT is nature. It's not nature. Like, if you wanted to critique NEAT and say, oh, it doesn't actually work literally that way, I would say, of course, it's just a meditation. Just like the Starry Night is a meditation on the experience of a starry night. That's what was really interesting about it. And I have the right to honor nature as an artist through the depiction of it. And I think that's really why it was popular, in my view, is because people liked the depiction. It's not because of the scientific fact it beat another algorithm on the pole balancing algorithm, which was the supposed reason that it was like a big success. No, it was because it actually resonates with your understanding of increasing complexity of nature, which is exciting. The HyperNeat algorithm was a contemplation on the relationship between the geometry of the outside world, which is often regular, with the geometry of the inner world of the mind. Like, it was about things like symmetries inside of like cognitive structures, which then have something to do. They're isomorphic to the symmetries that we see in the outside world, and that's why they can be computed efficiently and represented efficiently. But this is a kind of a contemplation. It's about an artistic kind of resonance with the way that things are structured in the world itself. That's a motivation, something we couldn't really discuss in that sense. And the novelty search algorithm, finally, this is a depiction of nature, actually. It's a depiction of nature as a free spirit and a rebel, because it's a process that becomes endlessly playful and innovative, but only when it's not told what to do or where it should go. You see, so like, if you think about the novelty search algorithm, if you've ever heard of it, like the search, it's an algorithm that derived from our insights about how things are found in PickBreeder, but it's about only searching for novelty and nothing else. So it doesn't have an ultimate objective. And so, like, you can justify it scientifically in ways because it does things like it finds things by preserving diversity that you wouldn't be able to find otherwise than scientific. But really, I think what was making me truly excited was the more Starry Night aspect of it, which is this free spirit and the rebel, in that this is an algorithm that's totally unchained. Like, you haven't told it what to do. So it's a free spirit. You're just saying, just do novel things. Let's see it play, and then be a rebel, because we cannot tell it what to do. If we did, it would screw it up, right? The whole point of it is that it's free and unchained. It's sort of like saying, like, take the smartest person you could imagine, like a total creative genius, like Einstein, and then chain him in the basement and tell him to make a good vacuum cleaner. It would completely destroy the point, right? Like, Einstein's value is to let him be free, not to make him do something, even though he's a really smart guy. And this is a depiction of that, an artistic depiction of it. Has absolutely no scientific point in that sense. Obviously, it has scientific value. The stepping stone is to understand the free spirit and the rebel. Are these insights less revelatory than a benchmark comparison? I want to ask you that. Is it less revelatory for me to describe these things this way than to show you the benchmarks that justify them? You know, how would you decide whether you were going to use the NEAT algorithm? Like this back in 2002, like would you look at these benchmarks? Like look at this, like look at how much better it was than these other algorithms, which you don't even care about now because you haven't even heard of them back. But back then they mattered in pole balancing. Like look how much better it is in these other comparisons. Like look how much better it is in all these other things. Like, is this the reason or is this the reason? The meditation on the elegance of the increasing complexity of nature, like this picture of things getting more complex. That's exciting. I submit to you, this stuff on this side is not exciting, even though it's true. Which is the real reason people all picked up on it? Our fear, so this is the closing. Our fear is that there's going to be a flood of mediocrity if we allow artifice to come into artificial intelligence. Like if we allow us to talk about the resonance with nature, because we think it's science. And so if we don't act as very, very tight gatekeepers, mediocrity will flood into the field. But the thing is, the blind spot is to prune too much. If you prune too much, you lose stepping stones. Are these spaceships objectively reminiscent of something deep in nature? It can never be answered objectively. It's purely subjective. But if we eliminated this from the discourse, the stepping stone is no longer admissible, so we would lose all of the offshoots. The right answer, in my view, is balance. Like we need to have balance. It's not that we throw out objectivity. We should have objectivity, but we must have the ability also to discuss subjective resonance or interestingness as well. Both are important in a field based on artifice. A good algorithm is one that leads to other algorithms, not just the one that performs the best, but it has to lead to other algorithms, which are the new frontiers, and the new stepping stones will lead to new ideas. How can we know what's interesting then? The fearful scientist would ask, well, artists do it all the time. We're qualified to do it as human beings. We do it all the time and it hasn't caused any problems. It's not that we should be completely lackadaisical. I mean, we have to care. We can't be just laissez-faire. But artists are that way. We can be critical of each other in an informed way. In other words, we're experts on the field, so we can talk in a critical way, but we must be able to talk about what's interesting, and we are qualified to do that. If we're not, I don't think we should be in the field. So this is just a quote from myself. I just quote myself here. I took the liberty, which I just thought was really relevant because it was in the paper, and I just wanted to end with that quote, which is to say that feeling is behind all inspiration, and an iron rule that it must be hidden implies that the spark of inspiration can never light from one scientist to another unless through entirely objective means. How can that really make sense in fields predicated on the artificial interpretation of reality? So thank you. Enjoyed that. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Marion. I think you're on mute, or I can't hear anything. That's good. Sorry? I hear you now. I do hear you.
I'll put the mic on.
Yeah, I hear you now.
So there was a very strong applaud. You didn't hear it, unfortunately, but
Yeah,
do
that's
know
okay.
it was there. Thank you so much for this talk, Ken. I have tons of questions, but I first also want to open up the floor to ask questions. And if you say it, I will repeat it so that it comes here. It's also possible to ask questions through the chat. And I will keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Happy to take questions. Happy to stay a little late. I'd be curious to hear what people have to say.
So something that I really want to ask you. So I don't remember if you did make this argument in the Leonardo article back in 2016 about algorithms as an artistic artifact.
Yeah. Let me actually. I think I'll take this off the screen.
I don't remember if you did, but that's not actually my question. My question is, picture that you're a PhD student right now, today, and you want to study AI as a type of art materials, kind of like a canvas or a palette or a type of paint. And you need to put this in a computational scientific setting. Like, how would you, what kind of arguments would you do to kind of get it through to the scientific community? Because we know this is difficult, right?
Yeah. Well, So this was the subject of the Leonardo article. I mean, this is a pretty loyal, just kind of summarization of what I tried to write in that article. But it's not a famous article. It didn't make that much impact. So people probably haven't heard the argument, but I wanted to make this argument.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay, cool. So but sort of when you ask, like, well, how can a student, say, for example, a PhD student, actually justify speaking in that way when they are trying to speak to their community? And I guess the answer is that they need to use the argument that I just used. I mean, basically, I am trying to justify it. That's what I'm trying to do, is give that justification through this argument, through the paper, through the talk I just gave. It's an attempt to make that argument. But I have to concede that the PhD student would be challenged to just come out with an argument like that in the middle of paper or something. Like, that's probably not going to happen. Which is why I think that the argument needs to be a side conversation. Like, it has to be its own conversation, which is what was trying to start with this paper, is that we need to actually talk about this as a field, because it's going to be very difficult if nobody acknowledges, recognizes, or agrees with what I'm saying. For a student to just go out there and assume they can do this, like, it's probably not going to work. It's overly optimistic and naive to think you can just go out there and act like an artist and like have people accept it in the field. Like, it won't happen, which is what I'm saying is a problem that I'm criticizing with the field. But I'm also not naive, and I don't believe that it's going to be easy. Like, I don't expect much change just because I'm saying this. Like, it's a very, 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 very hard edifice, like the edifice of believing that we're a science, that is not going to be easy to crack at all, because it's like really, really ingrained at the core of what it means to be in the field of AI, where we're very, very prideful of the fact that we're doing some of the most revolutionary science, like, in history, and we don't want to suddenly say we're not scientists. I mean, I think that there is great science going on, and in AI, and like, it is partially science. So I wouldn't want to discount or take away from the scientific aspects of it. But I just think that it needs to be acknowledged that there's a very important subjective aspect. It's sort of like, for example, I think one really good example of this is, the emergence of the large language models, where, there's a lot of benchmarking that's gone on to prove how powerful they are. And there was, like, when GPT-3 came out, there were benchmarks, like, showing, like, on this test set or whatever, or even on real tests that humans take, like, it gets this score. It's like, wow, that's amazing. Like, it's amazing. But the thing is, like, it never caught fire until ChatGPT. Like, this is not discussed, like most subjective things in the field, but like, what was a big surprise to actually, even internally, to OpenAI, actually, because I worked at OpenAI for 2 years, although I wasn't there when ChatGPT came out. I'd gone before them, but I was there when they were talking about it. But nobody knew that this was going to be like a worldwide phenomenon. It wasn't like a plan. It wasn't like everybody's like, oh, we just need to make a chat thing around this GPT, and then, like, the whole world's going to catch on fire. It was more like maybe we should do this. Like, this would be interesting, which is basically, very compatible with the arguments I'm making. It could be interesting, but then it caught total fire. It was my understanding is the most adopted product, the most fast adoption of a product in world history, until something else, I forget what it was, something else after it actually was even faster. But at that time, like, the adoption of the ChatGPT was like unbelievable wildfire, like tens of millions of users within a couple of weeks. And so the thing about it is, though, what it shows is that people didn't care for real about the benchmarks. Like, the benchmarks did capture scientists' attention because they were pretty good. But what people really cared about ultimately was the experience. The experience was subjective. Is it reminiscent of actually interacting with a person? And obviously it is reminiscent of that, which is why it's so spooky, and it just goes around the world, because, like, it makes you feel like something. It's just like a Starry Night, because in the end of the day, it isn't like a human at all. It's just like Starry Night is not like a Starry Night. Like, if you play with it enough, you'll know you're not talking to a person. But it's reminiscent enough, even though it's distorted in some ways, to be uncanny. And that makes you feel something subjective, emotional. And that's an important factor in our understanding of why it's an important contribution. But that is not admissible to discuss, right? Even though, like, in reality, that's actually what's going on. we can't discuss it. So I think that's kind of preposterous. We should be able to discuss that because it's the real thing that matters. That's why everybody is so enamored now with these language models. Is ultimately it's just like the subjective resonance. But do I think a PhD student can on their own just sort of like make that kind of argument? Not easily, but so more practically, I think what they should do is just show the subjective thing alongside the objective things and make the subjective point too, so that you've armored yourself and protected yourself with the objective, because that's what the field reportedly cares about. And it's what you have to get through the filter of the reviewer system. But like the real impact you'll have on the world, like the people who will pick up on you and follow you and care enough to build on your ideas, they'll be supercharged by the subjective argument. That's what'll actually get people going, because people like to be involved in something that means something to them emotionally. So still get it in there, but don't worry about the meta argument that I'm making, because you'll never be able to make it in a single paper.
No, I think in this case, we'll see what happens over the next 3 years, but maybe this could be a theme of a whole dissertation. That's something I'd love
possible.
to discuss with you at a later point.
I can see that. Yeah, that's quite a dissertation.
I mean, because it's really like, yeah. No, sorry, we had a question here in the room, but she forgot. she forgot it. Sorry. Did anyone else remember any questions they wanted to ask? Let's see if there is something in the chat. Try to remember your. She said it was good, but she can't remember it now. So, oh wow.
Okay, I think I remembered-ish what it was about, but basically like the way that we've viewed AI has always kind of been, it's been like itched into our brains that it's like a tool, right?
Mm.
And to reprogram our own brain to like look at it more as like an art tool or something of that sort. What would be like a tip or like a fun project or something to help us get out of that vision of AI?
Right. So the question, I hope I can paraphrase you right here. So, since we're so used to seeing AI as a tool, a functional tool, but if we want to see it as an artistic mean or an art material, how would we reprogram our own thinking, and what could be a good starting point for starting to do own experiments towards this? Is this
Yeah, kind of.
ish?
So it was more like, I mean, it's correct for sure, but I'll just to specify or clarify, I also meant more like it's easy to kind of try to make AI as an art tool instead of actual art. So like, how do we distinguish those?
So
to actually let it be free and not just like trying to reprogram it as like an art tool instead.
So basically, how to distinguish AI as art and AI as a tool for art. Is that what you meant? Yes.
Right. Okay, yeah, that's a good. It's true that like the topic of AI as a tool for art is like a very widespread topic. Like that's ubiquitous right now, and so there's no trouble getting discussion on that. What I raised is different and is not getting any discussion. But yeah, like AI is a tool for art. Of course, it's a big topic, probably a big topic in the class too, and deservedly so. It's a really interesting topic. AI, what is its role in art? That could have been what we discussed today too. And so how do those two things intersect though? Is a really interesting question. Like AI as art, AI as a tool for art. I think it's not an obvious intersection, except that well, okay, let's say there are some intersections, but they're much more let's say subtle. They're subtle because like they relate to things about how artists work, I think, which aren't as overtly discussed, but like artists, when you ask if something is really art, like if you ask the output of Dali or something, is it really art? or a Mid-Journey, one of these things. Like, is it really art? And we can just have these like really big debates about that. You're really actually kind of inquiring into what happens when an artist actually does something, right? Like, it's like the artist, which generally means human, like before, at least before these things existed, like the artist would go through a certain kind of a creative process, and so like what we're really saying is like, is the creative process that leads to the artifact analogous enough to call it the same thing? Like the process that Dali went through when it like generated that image, like, is it analogous enough? And if you think about that, then that's actually very similar to the question of subjective resonance that I'm talking about, right? Like, I mean, is it enough reminiscent? Like, it can be a distortion of like the true, because obviously it isn't the true process. Like, the true process involves a lifetime of experiences, and then the distillation of that lifetime of experiences into a kind of interpretation, which is my personal subjective interpretation of reality, that then gets converted into some kind of artifact, which is like a human process, which is not what happened in Dali, but is it close enough? So that's something we could ask. But when we ask that, we're asking whether it resonates with the process that underlies the production of that artifact. I think it's a very interesting question, but the lens of like whether it subjectively resonates is, I think, a good way to analyze it. And again, you can't have a right or wrong answer to that question because it's subjective. For me, though, I would come out on it doesn't resonate enough yet for me to think it's the same thing. Because I think that the lifetime of experience, like the story that precedes, the reason that you created something is like a big part of what makes it valuable. Like to me, like to understand your artistic output and like to know that doesn't exist behind it, like I think takes away sufficient amount of substance for me to say it's not the same thing. But still, the truth is though that like a Dali plus a person is actually a partnership, right? Because you wrote the prompt, Dali made the artifact. So the prompt is still a distillation of your experiences, right? Like that's still extracting from a human side. So it's hard to say that like the partnership isn't valid art. Like it might be valid art, it might not be. It depends on your interpretation. But if you just take a computer alone right now, today, I think they're, to me, too distant from what it means, like with the human experience of generating something. So I would be more skeptical. But all I'm saying is that you could use it as a lens to interpret this question, and then you might say, well, what would make it more resonant? What would make it more like me? Like if it was totally autonomous and disconnected from a person. Let's say there is no prompt. There's no prompt. I just have a computer and it just generates imagery. I mean, we could easily do that. We could have it generate its own prompts and then it could just generate the imagery on top of the prompt. Is that good enough? Like if I have the ChatGPT generate prompts for images and then like generate the images, then do you feel like it resonates with what an artist does? Like I still don't think so. Not enough for me, at least. It doesn't mean I don't like it. I still might like it, but I still don't think it's like the same thing. So it's just a subjective question, but I think it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, nodding is happening in the room. Just you know,
Okay.
because I can't turn it around that when we're recording because
Oh
of
yeah,
the
thanks.
GDPR.
Yeah, no, of course.
So I'm
It's always a
trying to
problem
keep you
online. Yeah.
updated on the
Thank you.
reactions.
Thank you. Good to know that.
Yeah. We are a bit out of time. I have one last question for you, and I don't know if you want to answer it. So if you don't, you could answer it, and I could turn off the. I'm so curious about what your new company is doing. I've been kind of Googling it, and can you say anything, or is it super secret?
Yeah, I'll sure. Yeah, I'll tell you about the new company. It's true you won't get much out of Google. We've said almost nothing about it. It's new. It's so new. But what the company has to do with is the book. The book that I mentioned, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. The book is, for those who don't know about it, it's about the insight I showed you from Pick Breeder, but it's like far beyond that insight. It's like been developed over many years, and basically it's an insight that having an objective can be a bad thing, especially for creative pursuits, for discovery and exploration purposes. Because like our society, our culture, Western culture, even Eastern culture, everybody's obsessed with objectives. It's like we define objectives and we go for those objectives. And the book is trying to argue against that if you want to foster innovation, creativity within businesses, institutions, even your own life. So making this argument. book makes this argument. It's kind of a radical argument. We should get rid of objectives for those kinds of things. And so like that book is 8 years old now, 8 years. And so after 7 years or so, the book had been out. I had been talking to people about this issue for years and years and years, like 7 years. I've been talking to people about this issue, and I had learned a lot about how people react to this issue, which is basically a discussion of serendipity, if you think about it. Like the way people see this issue is that, am I allowed to explore without knowing where I'm going? And why would you want to do that? Is because you want serendipity. Like serendipity means something transformative happens to you that you didn't plan, so it wasn't the goal. So people are interested in serendipity. And I learned about how people feel about serendipity, which is something I don't think most people learn about because it's not a discussion topic that's that common. And what I learned is that everybody is really, really frustrated with the way that the world works in terms of actually constraining us against being able to pursue serendipity, because everything is so goal-oriented in the world. And everything is like you choose your major, you choose your track, you try to do what your parents want you to do, you try to show people what you're supposed to do. Like you're always trying to get to the next milestone. There's very little room in any aspect of life for just serendipitous types of pursuits and discovery. And people don't like this. People don't like this at all. Everybody wants to change it. They want to change it at work. They want to change it at school. They want to change it in their personal life. But then they have really trouble changing it because it's institutionalized and calcified. So the whole system is very hard to get out of, because if you try to change it, then everybody above you will think you're doing something crazy and they won't respect that. You need to satisfy the bosses, the funders, you need to satisfy the teachers, you need to satisfy your parents. Like there's always somebody that needs to be satisfied. And they expect you to be objective so that you can justify what you're doing. Like, I'm not going to give you money just to do something interesting. I'm going to give you money to achieve something when you're explicit about what that is. And so it's very hard to break out of this. And I just had this realization, like I've been working on non-objective algorithms for a long, long time, like novelty search algorithm and beyond, algorithms that don't have objectives because they're inspired by this insight. And it just occurred to me that I should be able to build something for people that works the way that I'm claiming things should work. There should be a system that's not objectively driven. There should be a system for people that's not that way. And it should be online. Because the thing is, online systems also work objectively. Like all the social networks, likes, follows, it's all very objective. There's a concept of the best, the worst. You try to maximize your likes, you try to maximize your followers. It's all totally objectively driven. So it's basically antithetical to the argument of the book, but that's the whole point of the book, is that the whole of society works this way. And so I thought I should be able to create an alternative, because I understand algorithmically how to make non-objective algorithms. And as I thought more about it, I thought humans in the loop, non-objective algorithm, it's like a new kind of a social network, basically. A kind of a social network that works non-objectively, that's basically about discovery as opposed to maximization, would be something novel. And it took me a while to become comfortable that that's like actually worth doing. But I like that concrete enough talking to people. I found co-founders, I found investors, I found a lot of people interested. They started to think I just have to do this, at least try, even though it's like a kind of crazy thing. But I got to do this because I would be the right person to do this. I have this understanding of what people want, and it would be really cool. I think the internet would be vastly improved if there was something more like this. So that's what we're trying to make. That's what this Maven thing is. It's like a novel, non-objective kind of social network. You could say it's like a serendipity network. We'll open it up eventually to everybody. And if you want to like play with it or something, if that like really interests you a lot, yeah, we are obviously, of course, going to want beta testers and stuff like that. So you could feel free to email me and see if you want to get in early. And we just let you in. I mean, it's just in beta testing. There's no advertising or anything like that. It's like a totally free service. I'd be happy to get your feedback and see if you like it.
Nodding is happening in the room, and from me too. That sounds absolutely amazing. I mean, one of the first things we did in this course was to talk about the sciences of the artificial and definitions, and looking at just what an agent is supposed to follow an objective, and that is kind of one of the base rules when you read and learn about basic AI. And you going in this trajectory, it is so exciting. I can't wait to see what you're up to. It's going to be,
Thank you. Cool.
Really.
Yeah, same for you. I mean, if you want to get in on the beta, just send me an email too.
Yeah, I will.
As well.
So I think that on the web page that I showed, there was Ken's contact details on kenstanley.net. So
That's true. Yeah, you can find me through there.
so you can
Yep.
find him through there. And with that, thank you so much for giving of your time and sharing your expertise. This was fantastically inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was really fun. I enjoyed to be able to talk about this topic, which I don't often. So thank you so much.
Okay, then I hope you have a great day, and we will go and have a fantastic evening, I hope.
Okay, you too. Yep.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Så